In early 2017, frustrated by her own challenges in raising money on Sandhill Road, Astrid Scholz partnered with Jennifer Brandel and Zepeda to author Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break, an article that challenged the VC-dominated paradigm of startup capital and championed the cultivation of zebras over unicorns. In this episode, Astrid shares her perspectives on the need for alternative modes by which startups can raise capital and explains what she means by a zebra.
Hey, Astrid, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Maybe we could start with you telling us at a high level what Zebras Unite is all about.
Well, funny you should ask. Zebras Unite is a global movement committed to catalyzing capital, community, and culture that is much more conducive to building the kinds of startups and businesses that we want in the future and in the present.
Awesome. And when you say the kind of businesses that we want in the future and the present, what are you referring to there?
Well, I might be able to illustrate this with my own history as an entrepreneur, right? So yeah. I'm a recovering nonprofit executive. I spent 15 years in this industry that globally is worth multiple trillions of dollars. And it's made up of NGOs and social entrepreneurs and do-gooders and foundations everywhere, basically trying to solve the problems that we're facing today, from climate change to poverty to the environment, you name it. Basically all the problems that exist because markets and governments have failed us. So coming out of that industry, I saw an opportunity to make a technologically enabled intervention in helping people who are concerned with creating positive outcomes for the world collaborate more effectively. Mm-hmm. And so that business, it's called Sphera, you can find us at sphera.world, is technologically enabled. It's attacking, if you will, or it's making an intervention in a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and it is poorly understood by today's venture capitalists, right? Mm-hmm. So when I stepped out and reinvented myself from being a nonprofit executive to being a tech entrepreneur, I just met blank faces. Mm-hmm. You know, the way I like to summarize that is that, technology investors don't understand impact, and impact investors don't understand technology, mm-hmm. right? And so I had a real challenging time, despite being a very successful salesperson and fundraiser, to attract capital to this business. And so I thought, well, it's not me, I'm not the problem. The problem is the way capital, especially venture capital, understands businesses like mine that make a more systemic intervention in an industry that most of the venture capitalists on Sandhill Road just don't understand. They're just not familiar with my industry. And so I was getting a little bit frustrated, in 2015, 2016, and come to read an article by my two of my co-founders at Zebras Unite, Zepeda and Jennifer Brandel, called Sex and Startups. Mm-hmm. That sort of laid out essentially the rationale for an alternative, why we need an alternative to venture capital as usual.
Which could be the coolest Twitter handle ever, Sex and Startups.
Yes, although we're advised we may want to change it because, and given that we're a global movement, it does raise some eyebrows in some parts of the world, as you might imagine. But it is a very cool.
Just to go back to what you were saying from your own personal experience. So you left the nonprofit sector after 15 years. You started Sphera, which is Sphera, right? Sphera.world.
Yep, correct.
So you started Sphera.world. When you say that, technology doesn't understand impact and vice versa, what specifically do you mean by that? When you were pitching these VCs on Sandhill Road, what were the objections that you were seeing? Some specific objections. Where were some of those?
So one of the things. So again, it's solving the world's wicked problems is literally a multi-trillion-dollar industry, right? The UN estimates to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals is a $50 trillion proposition. Mm. And yet, when I talk to angel investors and VCs, they would say, "But how are you going to make money if you're selling to nonprofits?" Mm-hmm. I mean, it was such a basic level of understanding about this industry that I know well, right? It was just like, blank faces. Or there was a failure to understand that this is more like sort of enterprise resource planning. Like it's a more complex product, that we were building. Because the intervention is a bit more systemic, right? So it's not like it doesn't lend itself to the Hollywood, synthesis of like, oh, this is like Tinder for dogs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And so that it was sort of that combination of, we don't really understand your industry, and it doesn't reduce to a soundbite that proved to be a hurdle. And then, of course, along with raising capital while female, raising capital while being a first generation immigrant, raising capital while over 40. I mean, all those things started piling up. And again, that was a shared experience by the co-founders of Zebras Unite, that we were all in these industries that where we were making more systemic interventions, like journalism in the case of Harkin, or education in the case of Switchboard.
Got it. So you had your own personal experience where it was challenging to raise venture capital for Sphera, and your co-founders were having similar experiences. And then you said they wrote an article, and you read that, and then you guys started to collaborate. What did that collaboration look like? How did the kind of the movement that you're now building? What were the first kind of components of that, if movement's the right word?
Yeah, totally. I think it is the right word. So Mata and Jen had written this just glorious article, right? Sex and Startups. That is just, it was just so juicy, and it really hit a nerve.
What was some of the juiciest elements of it?
Well, it was, I mean, again, particularly being a woman, right? Like it so resonated, this experience that, venture capital is designed for liquidity events. I mean, just that running metaphor, like that of how this is really, everything is so male oriented and male dominated and organized in ways that men think about what constitutes success in business, right? So that really resonated, and it was because it was sort of tongue in cheek and pretty feisty, right? That also resonated. And so it turns out, Ania Williams, who's our fourth co-founder, and I were reading the article roughly around the same time, and then eventually both found our way to Jen and Mata later in 2016. And basically, and Mata and I both live in Portland, Oregon, and so we were introduced locally. Ended up creating another thing together while we were at it. But essentially what happened is, the four of us got together and said, well, for the 1 year anniversary of Sex and Startups, which they had published on Valentine's Day 2016, let's in 2017 for Valentine's Day posit the alternative. Right? So if Sex and Startups was sort of making fun and sort of taking the mickey a bit of venture capital and that whole paradigm, a legitimate feedback, and sort of pushback to us was, well, what's the alternative?
Right.
And so, right, which is fair. Like, what do you propose, right?
And you're like
this
refunder is the alternative. Great. End of podcast.
Yeah, sure. Perfect. Yes, perfect. The world needs another podcast, maybe. Well, I mean, WeFunder is an important piece of the larger puzzle, right? Like what we were basically saying, what we then came to is like, well, we ought to write the sort of bigger vision of what an alternative narrative could look like. Like part of what happens to founders is, and I fell into the same trap, right? I knew nonprofit fundraising. Yeah. The moment I made the sideways transition to being an entrepreneur, it's like, well, where do I go for money? Because this is now a for-profit business, so grant funding isn't the answer. And even somebody as experienced as myself, with decades under my belt and a PhD in economics, I was a little bit lost. Like, where do I go for growth capital?
It's got to be venture capital. It's got to be VC. That's the dominant paradigm.
That's the dominant paradigm. And you see Shark Tank on TV, right? And like that's the narrative. And if you spend even half a minute in San Francisco, all you hear is VC, 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 right?
Right.
And so we said, well, so it was a fair question, like, what's the alternative, right? And so that's how we came to write Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break.
And is that where the word zebras came from? And for our American audience, we are talking about zebras.
Well, I think was it John Oliver who pointed out that you don't get to dominate the pronunciation of the animal if you don't have it in your country, right?
Yeah.
He's South African, right? They actually have zebras.
Okay.
So it's Zebras Unite. I've educated my American co-founders on the pronunciation because right from the get-go it wanted to be an international movement.
Yeah.
So we published Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break in the spring of 2017, and literally thousands of people stuck up their hands and said, "I am a zebra. Oh my God, I thought I was so alone."
And so you kind of came up with the term zebra as you were thinking about what is the alternative to
and we were not and we were not actually the first people to describe a different creature, right? Because when you think about, like, the narrative was, oh, if you're not taking venture, you must be a lifestyle business. There were actually lots of other people who had talked about gazelles and donkeys and horses and even zebras. It's actually Kim Folsom at Founders First Capital had talked about zebra as sort of medium-paced growth company that maybe grows to only the tens or hundreds of millions in revenue, right? Whereas the unicorn valuation is $1 billion. So we don't claim to have been the first. What we did is we imbued the idea of the zebra with a little bit more meaning, right? So it's not just about how big your business can grow or what its valuation is. It's about the principles by which you grow your business, how you treat your customers, what kind of exit you want, right? Like, the other thing that wasn't a fit for my business and the other founders' businesses is, when you're in the business of helping people make the world better, like, what's the exit strategy, right? Like an IPO, it just didn't fit. Like, this wants to be a long-term sustainable business.
So without the exit kind of liquidity event for investors, then the classic zebra return for investors is profit distributions down the years.
Well, so I think that's a large area of the landscape that needs to be further described, right? So I was at an event in Philadelphia in September where I spoke on some of the work we're doing to describe the larger landscape of alternatives to venture. And Victor Wong at the Kaufman Foundation came up with this beautiful image. Like, imagine an ice cream store with only 2 flavors, right? You have vanilla and chocolate, where, venture capital, vanilla capital, right? Like, that's it, right?
Vanilla is debt, and
vanilla is VC and chocolate is dead, right? Like, you've got 2 flavors, but that's not a very interesting ice cream store, right? So there's a question of, like, what are the other flavors of ice cream? And of course, there's plenty of pioneers in this space, like whether you take, equity crowdfunding, right? That's a flavor of capital formation, of capital that's available. Or you take what Bryce Roberts is doing at Indie VC, right? Or what Decathlon Capital is doing, where you have, sort of various sort of variations on top line income or revenue participation for investors. I think there's a vast area between chocolate and vanilla.
We've been seeing a growing number of revenue share deals on WeFunder where investors are getting paid back as a percentage of revenues of the business and getting a multiple back on their initial investment.
Correct, right? And there's variations on that basic model, and then there's some really interesting things people are doing there.
Yeah. So we've been kind of assuming that everyone listening will know what you mean and what I mean when we say a zebra, but can you spell it out? What's the difference between a zebra and a unicorn, or just what is a zebra?
Well, for one, it's a real animal. It's not a mythical thing that you chase in your dreams. It's a real thing. It's black and white, so it balances profit and purpose. Zebras, if you ever see them in the wild, they're pretty feisty. So they tackle difficult problems, challenging problems. Going down the list of the principles, and people can read up on them at again on Medium at looking for Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break. We treat customers as our community, not as something that you churn, right? And for example, as an entrepreneur who's building a zebra company, you may not want to relinquish your control, and or may not want to dilute your control, and you may not be interested in a 5 to 7 year exit. And something like what I'm building, 5 to 7 years that's a very short time frame for what we're trying to get done in the world. So orienting my business to a 5 to 7 year exit doesn't serve the purpose for which
sadly,
I
we're not going to solve all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals in 5 to 7 years.
Exactly.
Sadly, we can but hope.
So,
hey, Astrid, were you upset with me because I think I tweeted this at you guys for Halloween this year? My 3-year-old daughter was dressed up as a unicorn, and my 1-year-old son was chasing him. Were you upset with me about that?
No, I think unicorns work best in the imagination of children.
There you go.
I think having them be the guidepost by which we organize our capital markets is what's problematic, my friend.
Okay, well, next year I promise she'll be a zebra. How about that?
I like it.
So we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but I mean, how we kind of got off on this long, like 15-minute tangent. It's not really a tangent. It's what we should be talking about. But the original question was, I think your initial introduction of Zebras Unite was, to build the kind of companies that we want to see. So you've kind of touched on a number of different facets of that, but are there any other attributes of that like these are the types of companies that we are excited to be building?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to move away from always drawing the contrast to venture-funded companies.
Right.
But we've all experienced what happens when companies are venture-funded, right? Like Facebook is a toxic platform. Mm-hmm. It's so toxic that it's literally undermining our democracy, right? As we're heading yet into another U.S. election cycle, or when you look at the WeWork debacle. Right? Mm-hmm. Like weird things begin to happen to companies when they're venture fueled. And we're particularly sad about the collateral damage of what's happening with WeWork.
That is kind of driven by the fact that it's venture fueled in those two cases, or that they're just huge companies that grew really quickly and, maybe more quickly than the kind of controls could keep up with, or that they had kind of been able to plan for.
Yeah, but the speed is so core to the venture model, right? Because it's land grab at any cost, mm-hmm. right? So land grab at monopoly at any cost, and you're gunning for that quick multi-gazillion-dollar exit. Mm-hmm. So I think you can't separate it from the fact that they're venture funded. There's other issues, right? Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we're building companies faster than the controls can keep up, that's a fundamental problem, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. Or one of the fundamental problems. Mm-hmm. And the other things that fall by the wayside, right? Like the way workers are treated in these companies.
And you could probably theoretically have a company that's just, got a super profitable business model and is growing, at a hockey stick rate based on its own, revenue and cash flows. But your point is that the injection of venture capital kind of exacerbates the problem, or can contribute.
It can. I mean, when you look at the history of large companies, like some of the so-called blue chips, right? Like IBM took decades to become as big as it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's still big today. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's just crazy things that happen with speed. It's not that speed is wrong or bad mm-hmm. in all cases. It's just that, I think it hems in the founder's opportunity to control the direction and the continued fit with your purpose. I'm mm-hmm. sure Mark Zuckerberg had all the best intentions, we're just going to connect the world, but you're not. What you're now doing is you're selling my attention to Russian troll farms. That's a mm-hmm. problem, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what happens with venture funding, or the result of venture funding.
Would you say you're anti-VC?
No, not at all. I think VC, especially if done right, is really important for many companies. It's the right fit. Mm-hmm. When you look at some of the life science companies that are springing up, where you need a huge infusion of capital just because the equipment costs and the R&D cost is so high, mm-hmm. I would argue there are many sort of new categories, right, where we truly need adventure capital, which is how venture capital started out. Yeah. What's problematic is that adventure, that sort of being the funder of outlier ideas, has actually become the norm, at least in Silicon Valley, right? And so our contention is that VC today doesn't even see the interesting outliers anymore. And that's borne out by the data, right? When 98% of people who receive venture funding are men, for example, there's just this massive collective blind spot as to where there could be real ingenuity and opportunity, including massive financial opportunity.
So you published the Zebras Fix What Unicorns Break article now, I guess, 2.5 years ago. Have you seen progress? Are you feeling optimistic that there are seeds of change afoot, and that this kind of dominant hegemonic paradigm of venture capital is now being kind of, I guess, challenged, or where other forms of capital, other approaches are starting to take root?
Well, we certainly see progress, right? We certainly begin to see the narrative shift. We begin to see sort of popular culture shift around these big tech companies, right? And the more that we see unicorns in distress, right, the louder the voices become around what are the alternatives and what could alternatives look like. And that's where Zebras Unite is, very fortuitously positioned, to have articulated an alternative vision. That said, progress is still very, very slow, right? When you look at the amount of assets under management in these more innovative revenue-based funds, it's a drop in the bucket, right, compared to the amount that's funded by VC funds. So there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. Maybe you could talk about some of the things that you guys are doing with Zebras Unite. So tell us what Dazzle Camp is. I know you just launched a survey. You've talked about potentially raising money for a Zebras fund. Can you talk through some of the initiatives that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about all three of those. So we launched a survey, both of our sort of in-house community. So we have 4,000 people online, another 4,000 people on our mailing list. And so between those, it's probably not 8,000 people, but maybe 6,000 people. We've launched a survey to help us understand the different stripes that Zebra companies come in terms of the kinds of problems they're tackling, the life stages they're at, the kind of capital they're looking for, and how they would use that capital. And that's designed, the survey is intended to help inform both our own program design, but also help inform the larger ecosystem in terms of, what are some of the beyond venture sources and forms of capital that could be really helpful to fund all these good companies. And that takes us pretty directly into the design thinking around a Zebra fund. We know, for example, that there are companies that may benefit from a seed size check, but not necessarily be seed stage, right? And so there are some interesting things around sort of debt-based or equity-like debt that you could do to really help those companies. We're seeing a second pattern around, companies that want to essentially retool their cap table and maybe buy out their original venture investors and reinvent themselves, for example, as steward-owned companies. And then just more recently, we're seeing this really interesting third pattern around these distressed unicorn assets. Right? So when you look at something like WeWork is conducting this fire sale of Meetup, and I think Business Insider and TechCrunch reported Meetup and like 5 or 6 other companies that they had acquired relatively recently. And so we were sort of, joking. We wrote a little article about Meetup. Like if we had a Zebra PE firm today, I mean, we would have loved to put in a bid for Meetup and retool that as a Zebra company. And we think there will be more opportunities to do exactly that. And so we haven't settled on a thesis for a fund yet or an investment vehicle, but we're working on the design of what that would look like. And it is informed, it is designed to be responsive to the need and these patterns that we see in the community. And then thirdly, that is all leading us towards Dazzle Camp, which will happen March 1st through 4th outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And it's Dazzle Camp this time, not Dazzle Con, which is what we called our inaugural gathering in November of 2017. Dazzle Camp because we're going to go to work. Like we're going to go to work together on the capital system and on our cap tables.
I love it. Well, I'll see you there.
You better be there.
Very cool. March 1st to 4th, Atlanta, Georgia. Check it out. Google it.
Yeah, we'll have more. Yeah, well, not yet, but you will soon, depending
Google
on when you air.
Soon.
Well, stay tuned at zebrasunite.com is where you will find out about Dazzle Camp.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, in terms of a call to action, if people want to read more, then just zebrasunite.com. You can browse around and check out the details for Dazzle Camp whenever it arrives. What about what are your thoughts on equity crowdfunding? What we're doing here at WeFunder? I was tongue in cheek joking earlier with the solution that everyone's craving. But yeah, seriously, what do you think about WeFunder and other platforms like us who are doing equity crowdfunding?
Yeah, so I think equity crowdfunding is clearly an important element of the solution, right? Like it's an important flavor in our Capital ice cream store. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a strawberry. I don't know. Pick your favorite flavor. But it's not, again, you wouldn't want to have an entire ice cream store just dedicated to strawberry flavors, right?
Right.
So it's an important addition to the Capital mix that's available to entrepreneurs. And that's why we obviously partnered with you guys and why we were running this pilot on figuring out if we can deliver sort of quality deal flow to your platform, but also then create a quality experience for the entrepreneurs, right? And so it'll be really wonderful to sort of look back on that and see how it's going. But crowd equity clearly is an important tool that entrepreneurs can and should avail themselves of.
To stretch the analogy, I wonder if we're actually a different store. Because if the first ice cream store is like the institutional ice cream store, and you have like equity, which is the vanilla flavor, and then that which is the chocolate flavor, maybe the WeFunder model is a totally different community-run ice cream store where we still have vanilla, which is an equity-based model, and then we also have chocolate, which is a debt-based model. Thoughts?
No, I like it because, of course, I come from Portland, Oregon, where we have a different artisanal ice cream store at every corner.
Yeah.
So, no, that works for me. I mean, I think what's interesting here is that, you yourself are not crowd owned, right? So I think it's
we kind of are. We just raised $2 million in capital on our own platform from our own investor base. We have to limit our own raises to accredited investors because we can't run a regulation crowdfunding raise on our own platform. But yeah, we've had a lot of people investing $3,000 at a time and haven't taken on venture capital yet. We wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it over time, but for the moment, we're owned by our users.
Well, I stand corrected.
There you go. We also went through Y Combinator, so I think.
And the two are not mutually exclusive, right? I think that's generally a really interesting development.
Yeah. It can be both. My vision is that the crowd. I believe there's a lot of value to having a piece of your startup owned by your customers, your fans, your community. I also generally think there's value in having your startup, be invested in by experts, institutions, sometimes VC funds, angels who are, have credibility and networks in the space. So for me, there's a complementarity between funding coming from the crowd and, larger checks from angels or institutions.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially if you can find them in a way that are aligned with your values and your purpose. I think there's a lot of value that can be added by institutional investors, for example, as a company grows, right?
Yes.
But it's a little bit. When you look at sort of the cookie cutter recipe, right? Like a lot of times, what happens is by your second or third round. Honestly, when we did DazzleCon, there was a number of, like older white guys, Gen Xers, who stood on stage and basically by their C round had been displaced as CEOs, right? And that is a form of trauma and abuse that we also want to recognize, right? Like this is not present for anyone.
We've had several founders that have come to us and WeFunder. I remember one founder of a biotech company who said his last company was doing very, very well and he was diluted to zero.
Yeah.
And so that was why he chose to do WeFunder for his next company.
It makes so much sense, right? Like and I think it's painful. It's painful however it happens, like whether you're precluded from accessing capital, as so many women and people of color are, or you sort of get run over by the internal logic of these VC funding models.
Women, people of color, and the other lens I talk about is geography as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
77% of venture capital goes to 3 states.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another way in which we're hoping to be a part of the solution. If we can empower women of color in Cleveland to be the investors, maybe we can also get more capital flow into women of color in Cleveland founders.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have a way at looking at your investor profiles, and do you find that sort of all different demographics are represented proportional to to the population?
So both on the investor side and the founder side, we are more representative of the population, the general population, than the conventional paradigm in angel investing or venture capital. So i.e. A higher percentage of our dollars are going to women, a higher percentage of our dollars are going to entrepreneurs of color. We have 3 awesome African-American founders live on WeFunder right now. Caribou just raised $1.7 million. That was the first Latina founder to raise $1 million with us. So on the founder side, we're doing better than the status quo, but we're still not, at parity. So we're far from women founders receiving 50% of the funds on WeFunder. One important thing when it comes to ethnicity, the median household wealth of white households today in America is 10 times that of black households.
Oh, easily.
$170,000 for white households, $17,000 for black households. And for me, a part of the challenge, the reason why equity crowdfunding is not a silver bullet, if you're an African-American founder and you go on WeFunder, if you're going to your friends and family to get the first dollars into your campaign, if your network has a lot less wealth than that white entrepreneur who's also running a campaign, then certainly it's not a silver bullet. But we are doing better than status quo, and we're focused on trying to get better and better still. And then on the investor side, same thing. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but I know that we definitely skew male in terms of who our investors are, and we skew older, we skew affluent. But again, if you compare to who angel investors are today, we're a lot more female, we're a lot younger, and we're a lot less rich. And we don't have data on ethnicity, but I would be surprised if we weren't also more diverse there as well. So again, I think we're doing better than the status quo, but still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, that's great, and I love that you're tracking on all those metrics. I'd love to.
I like data. And 16 as a management consultant is a tough habit to break.
Yeah, no, the nerd in me wants to dive into your data. If we can talk about that.
You can have me on the Zebras podcast, and we can talk about that. How about that?
Awesome.
This has been a really, really fun conversation. The last question for you, maybe to end on, is. We ask everyone, normally we ask everyone advice for running an equity crowdfunding campaign, but given that you haven't done that, maybe a piece of advice for someone who's potentially looking at starting a movement like Zebras. Have you learned any, Zebras Unite, have you learned any lessons over the last few years as you've worked with your co-founders on building this movement that you could pass on to someone that might be just starting out on that journey?
Yeah, don't do it. Don't. Honestly, nobody in their right mind sets out and says, I'm going to start a movement, right? Because then you might as well call yourself a prophet and start a religion.
Prophet, PH, that's PH in the middle, just to be clear, not F in the middle. There's definitely no profit involved.
There's no profit involved in creating a movement. Not yet. We're working on that, actually.
Well, actually, are you? Is Zebras Unite a non-profit?
Right. So a couple of lessons, right? Like one is, seriously, don't start a new movement if there's one that you can already join.
Right.
So I think a lot of people think, they have this epiphany and then they go, I must now be the one to solve it. And it's like, no, how about you educate yourself and see if somebody's already doing it, like be a joiner, right? And we were surprised. We're like, well, surely somebody has figured this out already. And we couldn't find anything that fit. And so we ended up doing it ourselves. And, I had the benefit of having spent 15 years in nonprofit management, so I was not afraid of that. And so we did it. But then the second big insight is, nothing scales if it's run as a nonprofit. So at the moment, we're operating under the fiscal sponsorship of Village Capital, and we love those guys. It's a great fit, great strategic alignment. We're doing a lot of work together, describing this sort of beyond venture space.
Another awesome alternative approach to conventional investing, the peer-based model.
Yeah, the pure business model is fabulous, and we take a lot of inspiration from that when in thinking about the Zebra Fund. So we are technically still a nonprofit, but what we're thinking about is, and we said as much in this recent piece we wrote about Meetup, and you said it earlier, like, movements should be owned literally by their members. And so we're actually undertaking steps now to convert Zebras Unite into a cooperative. And so think of it as why do I want Zebras Unite? Like, I want it to exist for my business, right? I want it to provide me with the resources and the community that I need to make my business truly sustainable in the long run. And so
I like a cooperative structure for a movement like this.
Yeah, and so we will come back to you to have a conversation about WeFunder as a member of a cooperative, and then let's figure out what the reciprocal sort of give and get is in terms of the patronage model. So think of it as REI for purpose-led businesses, right? So that's the second insight. Like, you have, for a movement to scale, you have to figure out how you nurture it and nourish it. Yeah, I think it's not gonna. If you try to do this on grant funding, good luck, right?
Yeah.
And the third, I do have an answer to the crowdfunding, crowd equity question, and that is become a member of Zebras Unite first, because you guys get a great deal. As a member of Zebras Unite, there's a great deal to be had on the WeFunder platform.
I love it. Well, that's a good note to end on. Astrid, thanks so much for your time. It's been a really fun conversation. Good luck with what you're doing, and I'll see you in Atlanta in March.
Yeah, thank you. If not before, it'd be great to have you there. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Adventure Capital is brought to you by your fundraising team here at WeFunder. It consists of Johnny Price, Kieran Ryan, Justin Renfro, and myself, Oliver Foyahan. Our cover artwork is done by WeFunder storyteller Yuri Choi, and we'll be sharing the adventures of founders every other week. If you have any comments, ideas, suggestions, or just want to say hi, don't hesitate to reach out at hello@wefunder.com. We'll see you next time.